We make a lot of doctrinal statements on this podcast, and a lot of doctrinal statements can often be rooted in like denominationalism, like just things that like specific denominations, believe or they say, and it's just ways that they interpret Scripture. And I think our most doctrinal denominational statement we make regards those drums.
It does. It absolutely.
I feel like that's a prerequisite to this podcast.
Right. I would say that our creed almost entirely is based on the drums.
Yes. I like that you smell what I'm stepping in. It is. It is. If you're listening to this podcast, you have to sit through these to get to the real meat.
Yes, this is our liturgy.
It really is. That's too funny, man.
Oh, goodness. But, we talk about doctrinal statements.
Yes.
We talk about creeds. We talk about liturgy. Today we want to discuss how to be religious.
Yes.
Not how to have rhythm.
Yeah.
How to be religious.
Well, and in our case, that is part of it. You are the bass player and our worship team, so,
when I practice.
and whether it's on time, it's debatable.
It's debatable. A bass player is neither late nor early. He's precisely on the time he intends to be on. Okay.
It's too funny.
Okay, but we're going to talk about how to be religious.
Yes.
And so let's first start by doing something that's very, very important. Let's set some definitions.
Yes.
Let's look at some definitions, right? So Merriam-Webster defines religion or religiousness. I think religion here is a personal set or institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs, and practices, the service and worship of God or the supernatural, a cause, principle, or system of beliefs held to with ardor and faith. And then they define religious as relating to or manifesting faithful devotion to an acknowledged ultimate reality or deity, of relating to or devoted to religious beliefs or observances.
Yes.
Interesting note here. Say that it's religious to have a faithful devotion to an acknowledged ultimate reality.
Yeah.
Atheism is a religion.
Oh, 100%.
Right?
100%. Just by the definition.
Merriam-Webster's definition.
Sure.
There. Okay, but that's a different
That's
podcast
another
for another time.
podcast for another time.
So what is the picture that these definitions paint?
Right.
Right? That, hey, if you're in a religion, if you practice a religion, if you're religious, you adhere to rules and liturgical practices, right? It's very ceremonial. It has to do with belief and faith. And it's about what you shouldn't do, not necessarily what you're empowered to do.
Right.
Is often what people kind of think.
Right. Rules come to mind when we talk about religion a lot of times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of our most viewed videos was actually a 60-second clip taken from a conversation you and I had about, I think it was the Old and New Covenant, in which said the Bible is not a list of do's and don'ts. And the number of people that were like, "What? Are you kidding me? Yeah, it does." But they failed to catch the context of what we were talking about,
right.
Because this is what people think of when they think of religion, when they think of Christianity.
Right.
Like, oh, well, it's about submitting to a list
of rules. Right. That's what the Bible is. The Bible's just one giant rule book.
Yeah. And the last episode you and I did together, we talked about the inclusivity of Jesus.
Right.
And we said that you have to follow Jesus.
100%.
You have to follow the steps. You have to do the things. Right?
100%.
Not talking about necessarily works, but talking about the prescription that Jesus gives us.
Right. 100%.
So when people talk about religion,
right,
I think oftentimes they see something that's almost sterile, almost like practices, steps, and going through the motion.
Right. I'm spiritual, not religious. That's the statement.
Yeah. And see, that kind of graduated. So I'm spiritual, not religious is what ex-evangelicals would say, or people who don't believe in Christianity, the tenets of Christianity.
Right.
Right. Like they like the goosebumps, but they're not really concerned about the doctrines or following specific.
Sure.
And I think the perception here is following specific traditions.
Yeah.
And things like that. And you know what? Growing up evangelical, this was a huge thing.
Sure.
Right? This was, I don't believe in religion. I believe in a relationship.
Right. Yeah. A religion and relationship, yeah.
Exactly. So the word religion and religiousness, or as Bill Maher would say, religiosity, is met with contempt in a lot of ways, right?
Right.
Because it feels confining. It feels like it's focused on rules for thee, not for me.
Right.
It's a top-down hierarchical thing.
Right.
There's somebody in a robe somewhere telling you what you have to do.
Right.
You
Right.
probably have to give them money.
Right. Yeah. They want your money 100%. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's interesting here is that what we sometimes don't do when we talk about religion is look at what the Bible says.
Right. Where our religion comes from.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And the Bible actually uses the word religion.
100%.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think one of the best places where it does this is James 1, 26 through 27. So that's what we're going to break down. We're going to use this as our model for how to be religious.
Right.
So James 1, 26 through 27 says this. If anyone thinks himself to be religious, yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this person's religion is worthless. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world.
Yes.
So James kind of paints for us what I would say are three aspects of true religion. And when I say true religion, I'm not talking about genes.
Right.
Okay, I'm talking about, this is what it looks like to practice religion.
Right.
Okay? The first one is that you need to control your tongue, which caveats with that you don't want to fool yourself. Number two is to visit orphans and widows in their distress. And number three is to not allow the world to stain you.
Right.
Right? So those are the three things. Any thoughts, questions, concerns?
So it's interesting, just as we were doing that, I was just looking up the definition of what the Bible actually means when it says religious. So what is the Greek word here being used? And it's really interesting because the usage of the word religious actually means fear or worshiping of God, to tremble or to tremble fearfully.
Yeah.
So these are completely that when the Bible's talking about religion, our definition isn't even in the same ballpark as what we're talking. It is, but not what we think about it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So what's interesting there, though, is it talks about like basically having this relationship of awe with God.
Right.
Right. And what James says is if you have a relationship of awe with God,
right,
then you will bear this fruit.
Right. Yeah.
And
if you are worshiping God, this is what you will do.
Exactly.
Right.
And these are the three things that he really keys in on.
Yes.
In his book, right? So the first one,
right,
control your tongue. Also, don't fool yourself. Interesting that those go together.
Right.
It's funny. The person who is always talking is probably constantly lying.
Yeah. Well, as a fool, right?
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. So James says, look, you got to keep your tongue in check.
Yes.
And when we get to verses 26 and 27, what we find out is that James is actually paraphrasing some of the things he's already spoken about in verses 19 through 25. So let me read James 1, 19 through 25. You know this, my beloved brothers and sisters. Now everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For a man's anger does not bring about the righteousness of God. Therefore, ridding yourselves of all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness, in humility receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. But prove yourselves doers of the word, and not just hearers who deceive themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. But one who has looked intently at the perfect law, the law of freedom, and has continued in it, not having become a forgetful hearer but an active doer, this person will be blessed in what he does. Okay, so James is paraphrasing some of the things he's already talked about.
Right.
Here. And like a couple of things that like pop out here real immediately is he's like, hey, look, be slow to speak.
Right.
Right. So he tells you to bridle your tongue, which is to keep a rein on it.
Right. Yeah.
Like we were talking right before we started recording. You had a professor that would say, "Don't say something unless it's worth saying."
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
So don't speak just to speak.
Right.
Make sure that you are kind of keeping that reined in. And then he says, be slow to anger. Now, I think that's interesting how he kind of puts that hand in hand.
Right.
And as he continues in verse 20, he says, a man's anger does not bring about the righteousness of God.
Right.
I think this is a really interesting point about how we speak, how sometimes we speak out of emotion.
Right.
And it's not that it's wrong to feel emotion or have emotion, but sometimes the things we say
Sure.
because of those emotions
Sure.
is too raw, not thought through, and does more harm than does good.
Sure.
And I love what he says here about how your anger doesn't bring about the righteousness of God.
Right. Right.
There is no such thing as righteous indignation when it comes to us.
Right. 100%. Yeah.
The only one who has the right to be righteously indignant is God.
It's God. Right. Right. 100%.
He's the only one with any actual righteousness.
Well, and I was going to say, I think it's really interesting too. So like, the Bible says like, Paul writes like, do not neglect to meet together as the habit of is some. When we think about religion, we tend to think about church, and church is religion. Coming to church is religious. If you tend to think about religion in the aspect of what James is talking about, to be religious is to worship God. When they gathered to worship God in a house, usually this was very intimate. This was very personal. And so what does he say about those who worship together? You need to be slow to speak. So listen.
Yep.
You don't be angry. He's showing us how to have church. You know what I mean? These are all be doers of the word, not just he's talking to Christians.
Yeah.
He's not talking to the non-believer out there. He's talking to us, and he's talking to us and how we relate to each other. And I think that's very interesting because he says, be slow to speak, let God be the one who's angry and righteous.
Yep.
And you be just quick to listen and slow to anger. And like I think that's our religion.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah, that's a key tenet.
It's how we worship God here, and it's how we worship God in the world.
Exactly.
So, slow to speak, quick to listen,
Right.
slow to anger.
And
Yeah.
it's not like James was dropping any new revelation on any
No.
I'm going to jump through 4 different Proverbs.
Sure.
Okay. So Proverbs 10:19 says, when there are many words, wrongdoing is unavoidable, but one who restrains his lips is wise.
Yep.
Proverbs 13:3. One who guards his mouth protects his life. One who opens opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Proverbs 16:32. One who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and one who rules his spirit than one who captures a city. Proverbs 17:28. Even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent.
Right.
Right? So we've got...
That's my favorite proverb. When we did the Proverbs Fool series, that Pity the Fool series, we did that one, and that's my favorite one because literally it says you can be stupid, but if you don't say anything, no one will know.
No one will know.
Yeah.
How are they going to know? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So again, these are not new teachings for James or for the people that he's speaking to. But he's reminding them. I think we said this in our last episode. Sometimes the most profound thing we can do is go back to the original truth.
100%.
Right?
Yes.
So that's what James is doing, is he's going back to the original truth.
Yes.
And then we see some other scriptures here. So Colossians 4:6, this is Paul speaking. Your speech must always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person.
Right.
Right. This is a kind of a practical step in that of like,
right.
Tone down the emotion, think it through,
right.
Speak when you're ready and when it's needed, not just shoot from the hip.
And just understand this. We think of religion as a list of do's and don'ts. There's not been a single do or don't yet.
Right.
It's been suggestions like, hey, you should speak less. You see what I'm saying? Like it's not an all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's an in between, which is really interesting because I think we tend to say the Bible it's here or here, and sometimes it is here or here. There are black and white statements, but it's also interesting that when it comes to worshiping God, finding that middle ground of it's not about don't ever speak, but when you speak, make sure it's something worth saying. You know? Yeah.
Exactly. See, because again, it's not a list of do's and don'ts.
Right.
The Bible is about virtue ethics.
Right.
And it's about identifying the right times and places to do different things.
100%.
This entire book of the Bible, Ecclesiastes, that goes through
the seasons.
There's all these seasons. There's all these times. There's different times for different things.
Right.
So in one season, one thing might be the right thing to do, and in another season might be the wrong thing to do.
Right.
But 9 times out of 10, you're not going to know that if you don't shut up.
If you don't listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, let's look at what Jesus said. Matthew 5:21-22 says, "You have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever commits murder shall be answerable to the court. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be answerable to the court. And whoever says to his brother, 'You good for nothing,' shall be answerable to the Supreme Court. And whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell." Right? So again, we see this combination of what we say in relationship to anger,
Right.
and it being as bad as murder.
Right.
Right? So
Which is funny. What he's saying, there's a difference between what he's saying and what Solomon is saying in Proverbs. When Solomon calls someone a fool, he's saying they've called themselves a fool. What Jesus is saying is you've angrily called someone a fool. You see, there's a difference here.
Yeah.
Solomon's saying if you do this, it's foolish.
right.
Jesus is saying if you say that, your guilty is just as bad as they are.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. And again, like this isn't necessarily don't call out sin.
No.
You know, this is about how you do things, how you say things, and what your motives are, where your heart is, what you're doing.
There's the difference. Jesus is saying if you tell someone you are an idiot, why do you keep doing this? You know it's wrong. That's you're a fool.
Yeah.
Okay. Solomon doesn't do it that way. Solomon says, it's foolish if someone continues to do this thing. You see, like he's bringing the truth out and letting you say, "Oh man, I'm pretty foolish. I'm the one who,
Yes.
like there's a difference here." And Jesus is knocking that difference. He's saying,
It creates a measurement for you to judge your actions.
right.
But we always want to take those measurements and apply them to other
Other people, 100%.
And that's why people then say they don't want to be religious, because they associate that methodology
100%.
with being a
Probably
religious
because somewhere along the way, that's happened to them.
Yeah.
They've been called the fool for doing something rather than the foolishness being brought to light,
Yeah. And as James is talking about some of this stuff, he does kind of hit on being a teacher.
Yeah.
And having these conversations. And it's kind of interesting to me if you continue to read through James here, he really attaches this desire of being the teacher,
Right.
being the voice, right, or being the authoritative messenger, right, to actively fooling yourself,
Right.
He's talking about being hypocritical,
Right.
He's like you're putting yourself in a. So you and I have had a bunch of off-camera conversations about authority.
Sure.
And I was actually listening to some podcasts about authority and some different things.
You love to know reasons why you shouldn't listen to me. I understand.
100%. But so one of the things that I was kind of picking up as I was listening to these different resources and kind of working through some of this stuff is like there are positions of authority and then there's actual authority.
100%.
Right. And what James is saying is like, don't be the guy that's like, you have to listen to me because I'm in this position.
100%.
Right. But be the guy who when he speaks authoritatively.
Right.
Because it's the truth.
Right.
Right. That's when Jesus shows up in Capernaum and they're like, this man teaches with authority, not like the scribes do.
Right.
Because the scribes preached from a place of position.
Right.
Jesus preached from a place of truth and authorship.
Sure.
Right. And that's the difference there.
Here's a really good example. This actually recently happened. Something happened, and someone came to me, and it was within church, and they said, "Well, why don't you just, as the pastor, tell them they can't do this?" Well, I have authority here,
Sure.
in this church. So if it pertains to ministries of the church or a position within the church, I do have some authority. But this was something that was happening outside of this and in their personal life. And I said, because I had a conversation with this person and I tried to lovingly say, what would God say, all do, but I don't have the authority in their life to be like, you can't do this. I have the authority to show them the truth, but I can't make them do something. And it was funny because the person was like, well, you're their pastor. Just use your pastoral authority to be like, you're either in the church or you're out of the church if you do. Like, that's basically what they were saying.
Yeah.
That's what James is talking about. Don't fool yourself with what kind of authority you have. Like, I may be a pastor, but I don't have the authority as a pastor to control people's lives.
Right.
Now, I do have if that person is doing something sinful within the church, I do have the ability to say, like, hey, here's where you're at. Here's where we are at as a church. I can't have you in this position because it conflicts with the gospel and blah, blah. Okay, there's some authority there, but I can't kick you out of the church. I don't have that authority.
Right. You can't revoke your card.
Yeah, I can't. That's not me. That's Jesus, and he may. But
that's up to him.
That's exactly right. Yeah. But that's James's example. Don't fool yourself. And I think a lot of us, we think we have authority in people's lives that we don't.
Right. And so because of that, we end up speaking
100%
and thinking that they should listen and hang on every word that we say.
Right.
Right. Here, listen to this. This is Jeremiah 17, 7 through 11. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose trust is the Lord, for he will be like a tree planted by the water, that extends its roots by a stream, and does not fear when the heat comes. But its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious in a year of drought, nor cease to yield fruit. The heart is more deceitful than all else, and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, to give to each person according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds.
Right.
Okay? So this is where we're kind of looking at that. We're kind of partnering this. Don't fool yourself.
Right.
Don't speak from your own emotions.
Right.
And don't find authority within yourself.
Right.
And then speak out of turn.
Sure.
Right. Because as God says in Jeremiah, your heart is deceitful. Mm-hmm. It's sick. You can't even understand it half the time.
Sure.
You can't understand your feelings. That's why we have conversations and we go to see specialists. And
right.
We have all these,
Right.
And we get counseling. We do all this stuff because we don't often understand what our feelings and our emotions are telling us.
You gotta ask yourself: is this objective or is this opinion? You know what I mean? Like objective is what God says. It's clear. Right. It's right there. Opinion is more subjective, right? It's the idea of like, well, this is personal preference.
That's why we have to trust the Lord.
Right.
We have to speak what he says is truth.
Right.
And not trust in ourselves, because when we do that, we speak out of turn.
Right.
This is exactly what I noticed with the ex-evangelical movement and the deconstruction movement and the progressive Christian movement is they speak out of personal experience.
Right.
And modern philosophy.
Right.
They don't speak from God.
Right.
And what they do is they put a filter of these things that I previously mentioned, and then they read the Bible, and whatever in the Bible doesn't meet up with their preconceived ideas, they cut it out.
Well, it's because they fail to see the need for religion, for a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It goes back to our conversation kind of last session or podcast was there are many ways. And there is some truth. There are many ways to worship God. But what James is saying, but at the end of the day, there are many ways to worship God, but these are the ways we worship God.
Right.
This is there are, but if your worship is doing these things or not doing these things, then it's not really worshiping God.
You're worshiping the wrong person.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah.
More than likely, you're worshiping yourself.
Right, 100%.
1 Corinthians 3:18 through 20. Take care that no one deceives himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in this age, he must become foolish so that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in the sight of God. For it is written, he is the one who catches the wise by their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are useless. Right? So again, this is Paul now teaching the Corinthians, don't consider yourself to be this sage or this, great philosopher of your time. Don't think too highly of yourself or your opinions.
For sure.
Everything you think of, God has already thought of and has thought of it better.
Right.
And he spoils your plans when you're not planning in his will, but you're planning based off of your own mind and intelligence.
That's the biggest thing I see with kids out of college and pastors out of seminary. Is that right there. Is like, okay, I've got some education under my belt. Now I know everything. And so I'm wise. And so you must listen to me. And you probably are wiser than when you went in.
Yeah.
But you're still not wise.
Yeah.
You still don't know everything, know? And I think that's funny because especially as we talk about our relationships within church and we talk about how we confront the do's and don'ts of Christianity or our faith, the moral suggestions that God is making, saying, hey, it's interesting how Paul is saying to the Corinthians they need to talk about these things, because he's saying, look, you can be Socrates or Plato, or you can be someone like that, but in the church, wisdom may come from a child.
Yeah.
Because it comes from God. And so don't think you don't need to listen to anybody because you've got the credentialing. And I see this, like I said, I see this with a lot of people in seminary. They come out of seminary, they've studied the Greek and the Hebrew, and they, maybe they took Latin even, and they know all these languages, and they've taken all these classes, and they come out and they have the reverend in front of their name or whatever, or MDiv or doctor or whatever. And they're like, I know everything. And then they get to a church and there's a guy who literally jumped off a tractor and he knows a lot too. But they don't listen to him because he doesn't have the right credentials.
Right.
That's what I love about religion, is true religion, as we're talking about with James, evens the playing field.
It does.
It makes it, I need to shut up just as much as you need to shut up. I need to listen just as much as you do.
Well, and that's the trap, right?
Right.
We're sitting here saying, look, it's not about what you think, it's about what God thinks.
Right.
And what happens in the falsely religious mind, or the false religion, is, yes, but I understand better what God is saying than you do.
Right.
And look, there's some truth to that claim.
Sure.
Right? Because there are people, and we're going to discuss this in upcoming episodes, who look at a verse and say, see, God said this, and you Christians don't even believe that or don't understand that.
Right.
And it's like, are we reading the same Bible? Right? Like,
right. What version? Do you get the message?
What are you looking at? How did you come to that conclusion?
Right.
Because there is a requirement there to study, to look into it, to try to get to it.
Sure.
But as you and I have said before, you don't necessarily need to know Greek.
No, you don't.
But use your resources.
Right.
And identify. And so here's the thing, though. Like that example you give, the guy comes from Bible college. He knows the Greek. He knows all that. He's going to help the guy on the tractor study.
Sure.
And go deeper with it.
Yeah.
You know what that guy on the tractor is probably going to help him with? Practical application.
Just say life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that look in real life?
Yeah.
Because you have all
what do you do with this?
Yeah, you have all this book study, but I'm out here in the field.
Right.
This has always been my issue with, and no offense, this has always been my issue with pastors.
Sure.
Is oftentimes it feels like, okay, it's easy for you to say that up there.
Right.
But you don't have to go to work tomorrow.
You don't have to, exactly right. You don't go into a secular community and have to do these things. 100%.
'Cause you don't have a real job.
No.
You get paid.
This is part of my job,
Yeah. Exactly. And obviously that I say that being a little bit facetious there, but the point is it's hard sometimes to see the application from somebody that you're not seeing walk the same walk that you are.
And that's where we as Christians also have to listen to our fellow brothers and sisters, because just because you're not, now I know you do have Bible college under you and you have things like that, but like let's say you're just an average everyday person. That doesn't mean the Holy Spirit can't speak something into you that's wisdom.
Yeah.
You see, that's the playing field that James is saying. If you're truly religious, if you're truly worshiping God, you're going to let God speak.
Yeah.
No matter who it's through, even if it's through a donkey.
Yeah.
You're going to let God speak.
Exactly. And that's something, not the donkey thing, that's something I know about you.
Look, you get up there and we're like, man, he's a donkey. Holy.
A donkey.
Yeah.
Even though you are now a paid full-time pastor who
Sure.
gets paid to study and invest time in what the church is doing.
Sure.
I remember when you were pursuing what God wanted you to do in that ministry while working a job.
Yes,
while
exactly
being
right.
in a secular place.
Right.
So like we want to put our goggles on too often and make a judgment based on where you are right now.
Sure.
But people have these different
we have
experiences.
that's why God gives us experiences, right? And so what James is saying is, don't be a fool and think that people can't speak into that, especially if it's God speaking into it.
Yeah.
And
Something that's interesting.
don't get angry when they do, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's the other thing, is if someone speaks something into you, don't be mad.
Yeah, that's really tough for me.
Yeah, sure.
I do get mad about it. But, that's my problem.
Well, no one likes to be getting called to the carpet, but, yeah.
And because I do consider myself smarter than everyone. But, in this Corinthians passage, as we were just having this conversation, it reminds me when Paul is saying this and talking about not being wise in your own eyes, that leads him into his conversation about not picking favorite teachers.
Right.
And not being like, well, I'm of Paul, or I'm of Apollos, or I'm of Priscilla and Aquila. Well, you can't be of Priscilla because she's a woman.
Right.
Like, another podcast for another time.
Right.
But that's, That's
Right.
what Paul is talking about.
They latch, and how many Christians see that's the religiousness that we're getting into today, though. How many Christians latch on to a teacher?
Yeah.
There's John Piper, there's Joel Osteen, there's who are some of the people we use? I'm trying to just not use people other people use.
I think we've quoted Piper. There's R.C. Sproul. I'm trying to think of anybody that's Tim Keller.
Obviously C.S. Lewis. He wasn't a pastor, but he was in his own right.
He was an apologist.
Yeah. But we a lot of us, we latch on to one, and that becomes our.
Yeah.
But what Paul is immediately saying here is, no, wisdom is. I just knocked my mic over almost. Wisdom is universally given through God.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we can another podcast for another time about how we receive such wisdom.
Yeah.
Because it's not just anybody; it's
Right.
through the Spirit. But
Right.
but again, it gets back to this core of if we are truly worshiping the Lord, we're listening to the Lord. We're slow to anger when we hear the Lord, because sometimes the Lord's going to say some things that we don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And we're slow to speak as well.
Yeah.
Which I think is how much modern worship is, because I'm using religiousness, the act of gathering together to worship God is what I mean when I talk about religion. How much of that is consumed by us talking?
Well, think about how many worship songs you've heard that use the line, I'm at a loss for words, and then they have 5 more verses in the bridge, right? Like,
and the Spirit comes in the bridge, and
Right.
then, yeah.
Exactly. I definitely want to hear more jam band worship, for lack of a better
Heck yeah,
you
dude.
know, where you just rock on a bridge without even words and let people, talk to God on their own.
That's a new T-shirt we need to make that just says Jesus was pro jam band.
Jesus was pro jam band. Yeah, he was. No, but to your point, like there's this. I do feel like worship music is a place that you can pick on this a little bit.
Sure.
Sometimes there is a proclivity or a desire or a method in which it's trying to be profound,
Right.
Trying to do mic drops. It's almost like meme worship,
Right, 100%.
Trying to say use a line that's going to stick with you.
For sure.
Right? Oh, that line sticks with me.
Between these two songs, I need to say something so profound that the Spirit can move.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's what's happening, right?
Exactly.
But that's not worship at the end of the day, because worship is all about God.
Right. Instead, what it is it's taking your personal feelings and emotions,
Right.
that are even sometimes in a good place,
Right.
and then trying to ultimately get people to hear you.
We need more fearful worship is what we need.
Yeah.
And by that I mean that in a good way. That's another T-shirt. And by that I mean like worship should inspire awe of God.
Yes.
Not of us.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of us is like, oh, wow, God's so good. But like, no. We should be singing and sitting there saying, oh my gosh, the creator of heaven and earth. This isn't just a God who walks with me. This is the God who can create and destroy.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we need to be but like it needs to be metal. It needs to be brutal worship.
The beginning of wisdom is fear of God.
There's truth in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think to kind of put a pin on this first point,
Right.
Because we're starting to tangent a little bit,
We are.
but all these things fall under the same thing. Don't be so quick to get your words heard.
Right.
Right. Don't be so quick to move in these places of speaking and sharing your wisdom.
Right.
And I think another example of this, have you ever been in a situation where you tried to share with a brother or sister in Christ?
Mm-hmm.
This used to happen to me. It happened to me on multiple occasions where I would try to be vulnerable and share something with somebody.
Sure.
And they would go into like pastor mode.
Yeah. 100%.
And then I no longer felt like we were on the same playing field.
Sure.
I felt like now they were putting themselves above me in a hierarchy.
Right.
And like trying to, and now,
Almost condescendingly talking
Yeah.
to you. Yeah.
and I don't think it was ever really intentional.
Sure. No. Sure.
But there's, it's just this understanding of, well, when you come to me with a problem, I have to step up and be the solution to it.
Right.
Jesus needs to be the solution to the problem.
Sure.
I need you to hug me and pray with me.
Right.
And, not to tell you how you need to minister to me.
Right.
What I really need you to do is listen to the Spirit.
100%. That's why it's slow to speak, right?
Exactly.
Give the Spirit some time.
And some space.
Sure.
Yeah, to do what he needs to do.
It's funny when I do pastoral care, a lot of times, like when I'm talking to people and I'm saying, okay, yeah, I'm asking questions, and I'm more so asking questions to understand, but I'm also asking questions to allow me as I'm listening to also be listening to the Spirit to say, all right, God, what am I even supposed to do with this?
Right.
Like what, because some people are looking for answers. Some people do just want to vent. Some people need encouragement. So it's like, but the Spirit is what does that. And so this is where James begins and says, don't be a fool and think you're wiser than you are.
Right.
But also, when you speak, as my professor said, make it worth saying.
Make sure it's something we're saying.
Yeah.
And then if we're speaking less, we maybe have more time to do more.
100%.
And this is where James gets us into the next part where he says that we need to take care of people in need. So this is the second aspect of being religious. And specifically, he talks about widows and orphans.
Right.
So specifically, he says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress.
Right.
So again, this isn't new.
Right.
Right.
So, this was Old Testament through and through.
Oh, yeah. So here's Proverbs 14:21. One who despises his neighbor sins, but one who is gracious to the poor is blessed. Psalm 68:5-6 says, a father of the fatherless and a judge for the widows is God in his holy dwelling. God makes a home for the lonely. He leads out the prisoners into prosperity. Only the rebellious live in parched lands, right? So this is the ministry of God, the Father of Jesus, is to provide a place, to be a father for those without one,
right?
To be a home for people who are lonely,
right?
And to be an orchard for those who are in prison,
right?
Right? That's what he's doing,
right?
Right? And he wants us to be a part of that kingdom. So let's look at Matthew 25:34-40. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me.
Right.
I think that's...
We have to understand, it's really interesting you bring this up, because our job as a church is to care, to love people. And we've talked all about what that means, and it's not the same definition of the world's love, and and it's not rejoicing in wrongdoing. It's to love and to care for people. In the early church, when you joined the Christian faith, a lot of times you lost your whole family. So it's to be a family for the familyless. It's to do the things that for lack of a better word, Jesus is saying right now, to do these things, to care for the oppressed. But, Jesus said it all the way back in the Old Testament too. But it's really interesting. Have you ever, so I know, because I've been in situations like this as a pastor, when you have someone who cannot control their tongue, do you know how much ministry gets done in a church? Very little. You know why? Because you're putting out fires constantly left and right.
Yeah.
That's what happens. They can't control their tongue. They can't. So you're constantly having to have conversations with them and others. And so once you, like you said, once you get your tongue under control, then you can actually start doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of churches have the problem of they don't know how to control their tongue. So they're putting out problems.
Yeah. They
might not even say they're problems. So a lot of churches that get inwardly focused are because they're pointing so many fingers at other people that they're creating so many problems that they don't actually get to get out in the world and do things. But that's the whole reason why we're here, is to get out into the world and do things.
Have you ever heard a pastor preach a sermon that you knew was pointed at somebody directly?
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Oh, for sure.
Like, I think that's another example of bridling your tongue.
Right.
Like, this is not ministry. This is not helping.
Right.
You need to be spending time with that person.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
100%.
Not preaching from the pulpit.
Oh, for sure.
Right? If they're not going to hear from you face to face, don't preach it.
Right.
Right.
Well, I never use the story, especially in this church. I never use a story of someone in the church without telling them.
Yeah.
So I never, because I don't want them to think I'm using them. Now, sometimes I will off the cuff if it's like really good and it's a praise. I'm going to praise somebody from the pulpit, like, oh, so and so did this, and I might single them out a little bit, but like especially if I'm like using them as an example, and usually it's always positive. I never use negative examples, but I don't want someone to ever think, oh, this sermon is about me. And I've actually had that happen before, where I had a guy afterwards come up and he's like, hey, was that sermon about me? And it was really funny because when I saw them show up, I was like, oh crap, I bet you they're gonna think what I'm talking about is about them. And so I made sure I said no, but like I think again that gets into the idea of religion as a do and don't.
Yeah.
And that's not even what James is saying. James is saying control your tongue so then you can really do what the church does, which is cares for people.
And that's the thing. The truth is every sermon is about you.
Right, 100%.
But not specifically about you.
Right.
It's about a principle that you should be trying to abide by. And if you hear a sermon and say, is this sermon about me?
Right.
Then you maybe need to do some searching.
Right, 100%. It's like if you're sitting in there and you're sharing a story and you're just looking at one person and that person's like, yeah, he's talking about me. Mm-hmm. You've missed the point of a sermon, because the sermon's not just about that person.
Yeah.
It's about what God wants everybody to hear.
Yeah.
Not just that person.
Last point on this, I was talking to somebody at work the other day. Somebody did something at our job that was like wrong, incorrect. And he was like, should I send an email about this? Should I send an email to the whole team about this? And
Right.
I was like, but it was one person who did it the one time.
Right.
Have you just talked to them?
Yeah. Have you used the biblical model of confrontation?
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This still holds up in a secular model.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Like don't.
But we need to address it because we need to get back to the work we're supposed to be doing
Exactly.
at our job and in the church.
Exactly.
So you need to control your tongue, and you need to be slow to anger and quick to listen, so that you can do what the church was made to do.
So the solution that we're providing is
Right.
taking care of these people who are in need.
Right.
Philippians 2:3-5 says, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility consider one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus. So again, Paul's in agreement here. Our goal should be to take care of people.
Right. And not to laud it over others.
Exactly.
Look at us taking care of these people.
I'm so great.
Yeah.
So many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the person who donates millions of dollars to the church for that plaque.
Yeah.
And then like I think I've shared this story before, but there was a couple at a church I was at, and they are bajillionaires. They don't dress like it, they don't act like it, they don't talk like it. They're very humble people, and it was really funny because people used to come up and say like, "Hey, I'd like to do this for them," and I would lovingly say, "You don't need to." They'd be like, "No, I want them to. I want them to," and I'm like, "Little do you know that this person has done so much for you and everybody else in here. They just never told anybody, like it's just, but that's how the church should be. The church, we don't need to laud our programming.
Yeah.
We should just be doing it for the sake of worshiping God.
Right.
Because we love God, we're going to love others.
Exactly. 100%. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Right. James continues in James 2, verses 15 and 16, he says, if a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that?
Right.
You know what I think of with this one? And I'm not trying to open up a weird can of worms.
Sure.
I always think of thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, for sure.
Right? That's kind of the levy is like, you say thoughts and prayers be with you, but you're not doing anything to solve the problem.
100%.
Right? Now, I think most people that make that accusation are ignoring everything that people who pray are actually doing.
Right.
To try to
they
solve
don't
problems.
believe in the power of prayer. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we need to make sure that we're not just offering prayer, but that we're also offering solution, right? And working towards that.
Yes. As we especially, I always say when I'm talking to people in care moments like that, like obviously I say this like literally, obviously I'm going to be praying for you. What else can we do? Do you need meals? Do you need us to get medication or groceries for you? Do you need a ride? Because it's both. It is the spiritual and the tangible
Right.
that we need to be providing, because we as a church, that's what made the power of the church, early church, so much, was not only were they praying and miracles were happening, but people were not hungry.
Yeah.
Exactly. it was both.
Exactly.
And that's how the church should be.
Yeah. 100%. And all of these scriptures also kind of indicate that you need to start with those who are in your immediate family,
100%,
those who are in your church family,
100%,
and then go out from there.
And that's I'll tell you, I don't want to get us on tangent, but that was a big paradigm shift for me, because I was very much so, and I still am very much. I've worked in homeless shelters, I've worked in social services. That's what I did kind of through seminary before even coming and working with you when we worked together, you know, so like I've had a lot of background in that, and I've always been about the community. And I think that's so important. But one of the things is I've really learned as a pastor is if I'm not taking care of my home, and I'm talking about my home, my ministry will suffer.
Yeah.
Okay. So it starts in your home, but then it goes to your next home. If I'm not taking care of my church family, I can't take care of my community family. And they're all, if we look at ourselves being all family, you know, all united under God, so you've got to take care of those things. And I think what's interesting is a lot of times we go out here, but we're not taking care of ourselves in here or at home. And so James is right on this, though, in saying, again, how do you take care of yourself at home? Well, don't be a fool. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to, when we start talking about this, and we've been talking about, you know, bridling your tongue.
Right.
And then, you know, visiting widows and orphans in their distress, doing things for people. Mm-hmm. Right. I do go back to that story of Judas.
Right.
And Judas telling Jesus when she comes in, the woman comes in and she's got this perfume that's worth 300 denarii.
Right.
Now, to give you an example, Jesus, when he feeds the 5,000, the disciples say we would need 200 denarii to feed.
Yeah, right.
So 300 denarii would feed like 7,500.
It's over a year's worth of wages.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money,
yeah.
Right? And Judas is very quick to say it would have been better to give that money to the needy.
Right.
And Jesus responds in one of the most unique ways that so many people
most
overlook.
Unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he basically says, the poor you will always have with you. She's doing this worship for me.
Right.
Let her do her good thing, right?
Right.
What I really feel like is happening here, when Jesus says the poor you always have with you, what he's saying to Judas in that moment and to the Pharisees who are agreeing with him, the poor are right outside.
Right.
If you think that's more important than what we're doing here,
right,
then why aren't you with
head
them
on out
instead of here with me?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Go out and do that thing. And what he's saying is, you know, Judas, you want to talk the talk.
Yeah. You're not doing what you're saying.
But you're not doing the thing that you're saying.
Right.
And also, we know you're skimming off the top. Yeah. Right. And I think this is the thing. Like everything that we just talked about with like helping people in need, people are going to be quick to agree with that.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Which would be, you know, and especially non-believers.
Right.
Going to be like, yeah, that's my issue with the church is not doing enough.
Right.
Don't be so quick to tell us what we need to do.
Right.
And be a little bit quicker to go do those things yourself.
Right.
Shut your trap and get to work.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen. Yeah.
Quick to listen.
Yeah.
Right. So stop agreeing because you know somebody else needs to do this.
Right.
Here's another issue. You know, we have a new president.
Right.
There's a lot of people who don't like Republican policies,
right?
Because they say that Republican policies are not giving enough. They're not charitable enough. They don't take care of immigrants. They don't take care of classes of people, different things like that.
Right.
There are people that will use these types of scriptures to say you need to support this political agenda,
right,
in order to support these people. Now, what's interesting here is James says something really interesting in this verse. He says, "Visit." Orphans and the widows in their distress.
Right.
I think sometimes when we try to take stuff like this and apply it to a federal political agenda, it doesn't meet what God is talking about in the scriptures.
Right.
Because it's not face-to-face, it's not a community, and it's not an act of love.
Right.
Right? Consider the difference between these two things.
Right.
Going to a homeless shelter and literally giving your money that you have in your pocket that would have gone towards other things to somebody who needs it.
Right.
Cooking them a meal.
Right.
Giving them your clothes.
Right.
Right. Doing those things versus being okay with an additional 15% taken off the top
Right.
so that the government will do it for you.
Right.
Okay. These are people who want to talk the talk, but aren't necessarily willing to walk the walk in a way.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point too, because I think if you look at what you just said, especially about the widows and orphans and James's opinion, it all spends down to how you're looking at it. He doesn't say solve, and it's interesting because you can't solve a widow or an orphan. They've lost their parents and they've lost their husband and or wife. It's probably their husband because that's a widow. Widower is the male version, and he says widow specifically. So that's interesting, right? Because you can't solve those things.
Right.
So he's not saying go out and be the solution. Go out. I'm using that as an example to say you cannot solve poverty.
Right.
You can't. That's what Jesus is saying to Judas. You always are going to have poverty. You can't help that people are going to make poor decisions. You can't help that things are going to go poorly for some people. Not all homeless people are drug addicts. Some people that I've found actually that are homeless choose to be homeless. Some people like that lifestyle. And you're like, how could they? They do. I don't know. They do. I know people. I know a guy who actually had a job and lived in a shack down by the Mississippi. He was one of the very first people I met that blew my mind. I was like, you choose to do this? He had a van and everything. And he was not a contractor. He worked in construction, but he just took jobs here and there. And he would take our handouts. But he didn't want a solution. But I think that's really important because I think all of us, we go out and we think we have to solve these things. That's not what James is. No, he's saying we need to be present. We need to be ministering in these things.
Yeah.
Because we can't solve them.
Right.
Jesus is the only one who can. God is the only one who can solve these things.
And he will only solve them in the ending of time.
Right. And so that's why going back to your kind of idea, policies and things like that, when we're trying to solve things that cannot be solved.
Right.
People are going to be done with their money. Hurricanes are going to destroy homes.
Yeah.
Insurance companies aren't going to cover things. I mean, this is the world. It's a fallen world. But what we can do is we can be the hands and feet of Jesus. Which, what is he? Remember what we just talked about? No, now we need to be careful. We're not going to go into this and say, repent, you've done something wrong.
Right.
But we can be the hands who are leading them to the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
That's our job.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's the thing is you will see there are followers of Christ who are doing these things.
Sure.
Because we look at, you mentioned hurricane.
Right.
A few months back, hurricane on the East Coast. The government offered people who lost everything $750.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
The government agencies that were helping people chose not to help certain people based on their political affiliation.
100%. Sure.
These are true documented things. Right?
Sure.
People from the church, people from religious organizations.
From our movement.
Right.
Yeah.
From Church of God.
Yeah.
We're there.
Yeah.
Helping people in their distress.
We've sent money. We sent people. Yeah.
So here's the thing. When you tell the church they aren't doing enough, it's because you're not looking hard enough.
Right.
So if you're outside the church, judging the church, stop.
Right. Well, and I also think it's important, too, to understand that widows and orphans is what James calls us to.
Yeah.
But widows and orphans in every community looks different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So widows and orphans back then were their in need community because to be a widow was to have no support system as far as no income, no nothing. So we're children. There were no orphanages, but in our community, widows and orphans could look completely different. It could be homeless. It could be drug addicts. It could be, there's a million things. The reality, though, of what James is calling us to do is we need to be ministering to people.
Yes.
Inside the church and outside the church.
Exactly. If you think that there is a federal policy or political platform that will use your tax dollars in a way that will help people and you think it's good, by all means support it.
Yeah.
But don't let that replace going and meeting people where they are.
And I think there is some fair criticism, of the church today, partly because I think the church back in the day really went hard. And by that I mean the good way. We created schools. We created orphanages. We created hospitals. We did everything. We could probably do that in this day and age if people would let us, but they won't.
Right. Well,
if we did go out and create a hospital, you'd be like, no, that's a bigot hospital, and we're not going to it.
Missionary work increased literacy.
100%.
But God forbid we allow the church to run schools.
Right. 100%.
Right? Not going to happen.
Right.
But guess what? You're not doing it as well as we did.
Right. I just think that stuff is funny. But it goes back to the conversation. Yeah, you can critique us, and sure, we can always do better because we all can do better. But you have to. Christians, we have to do better because this is what James is saying and what Jesus is telling us to do. But also, world, you have to understand that Christians are doing it in different ways.
Exactly.
And also, again, the job is not to solve. We can't.
Right.
I cannot solve homelessness, no matter how hard I try. But what I can do is I can be there for that person in that moment. I can minister to that person, and maybe I can solve for them, for one person or for two people. So I just think that that's important to understand, because that's what religion is, right? That's how we worship God, is by loving others.
Yeah. Absolutely. So watch your tongue.
Yeah.
Because you're fooling yourself when you speak too quickly.
Right. If you think you've got the answers on how you can solve those things, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah. So again, don't say nothing. Number 2, go out and help people in distress, right? The third one here is be unstained by the world.
This is an important one.
Right. This one is really important. And I think this is where we get back to a worldview conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. One of the first episodes we ever did was on worldviews.
Yes.
Right. And having a biblical worldview. When James is saying be unstained by the world, what he's saying is don't filter your worldview through the world's wisdom and the world's way of thinking.
Right.
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 Don't
contextualize Scripture to the fact it loses its truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Instead, keep yourself in line with Jesus.
Right.
And let his teachings flow from you.
Right.
Right. And
I feel like this
is
the biggest place people push on religion, right? Because what this is getting at a heart of do's and don'ts, but not in the way that we think.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's look at 1 John 2:15 through 17.
Mm-hmm.
Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God continues to live forever. Right? So do not love the world. We're not talking about the people in the world. Love the people in the world the way God loves the people in the world. But do not love the sin or the practices or the wisdom that doesn't come from God.
Yes.
John 17:14 through 16 says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them away from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Right? This is Jesus praying over his disciples, and he's praying this over us as well. We are not of the world. We are of Jesus. We are of the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
Right? We're not going to mingle very well.
Sure.
Right? And we're going to have to make decisions whether or not we're going to abide by the practices of God or abide by the practices of the world.
Right.
Right? The laws are different. The morality is different. God has his true morality.
Right.
The world has its subjective morality.
Right.
Right? Are we going to live in his true morality, or are we going to accept the subjectiveness of what the world accepts?
Sure. Well, and I think it's interesting too, because when you think about religion and because this is where all those people start to get into the debate, and you're saying, well, now you're telling me how I need to live my life and X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. But as you were even just saying that, I was even just thinking to myself, interestingly enough, James gives us 3 ways to worship God. God gives us three areas we need to heart, mind, and soul love him with.
Yes.
If you look at these, you can kind of make an argument for first one is heart, right? So control your tongue. Anger is in the heart, right? That's where. So he's talking about angry, but so how we worship God with our heart is by listening. That's one way. That's one way. We're listening to others, listening to God. How we love God with our head is by literally loving other people. What we do. And so mind controls our body, right? How we love God with our soul is literally our entire being. Yep. And I think that's how we worship God, with our entire being. This is what he's saying is we always talk about the do's and the don'ts. Religion is not a list of do's and don'ts, because no one has ever told me anything I don't already want to do.
Right.
Because if you truly love God and you truly want to honor him, you're going to want to do what he says.
Yeah.
You're not gonna there, and I mean that in a way, like, for example, I think I've shared this before, like quitting smoking. I used to smoke cigarettes like a chimney, man. I smoked all the time, and that was. And if you do, I'm not here to judge you, because you're already judged last podcast. I'm just kidding. No, but I really felt convicted that I need to quit. I have a family. I was getting into ministry. And worst of all, they were becoming a huge crutch for me. Whenever I had stress in my life, whenever anything was going on, I'd go out and I'd smoke like 30 cigarettes. And I would just like, that was how I blew off smoke, literally. And it's to the point that even one of my friends was like, does it make you feel warm inside? Or what? Why are you going outside and smoking so much? I'm like, I'm just under a lot of stress. And I was like, okay, I need to stop this. And it was really interesting. I knew I needed to stop it. No one told me, Brandon, you need to stop smoking. It just was something that the Spirit laid in my heart, and I wanted to do it. And I did. I quit actually really cold turkey. I was just, boom, one day I was just done with it. But I say that to say, like, the reason why people have a issue with the do's and the don'ts is because they don't really love God. Mm-hmm. And I'm not being mean. I'm just saying that. You really don't care what God, you really don't love him with your whole soul, with all of it, because you're not willing. You want the world.
Yeah.
You don't want him. If you want him, you're going to want what he wants. You're going to, and I mean that. I'm not saying like, oh, no, you're going to really genuinely say, what do I need to do? Uh-huh. What do I need to do to be saved? You know?
Well, I think it's hard. People say, well, why should I want God?
Right.
Well, because God is good.
Right.
Well, prove it to me.
Right.
Well, you know what? That's hard.
Right.
You know,
sure.
Like, first of all, you have to be open to be having that evidence.
Right. Are you ready to listen?
Yeah. Are you ready to listen? Are you ready to set aside things? You have to almost try it and experience it.
You've got to do what James says.
Yeah.
You're going to have to be slow to speak,
right?
Quick to listen, slow to anger, because you're not going to like what you hear. Yeah.
And what we end up is with situations like, well, then show me some kind of sign that will make me believe.
Right.
And that's where Jesus said, this is a sinful and wicked people who ask for this sign.
Which, by the way, I just did.
Yeah.
I just did on the other side of the
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've already been taught what is right.
Right.
The teaching does resonate in your spirit, whether you want to agree with it or
100%. Yeah.
The fact that you get so bent out of shape by what we say
Right.
tells us that it's rattling in you.
Right.
Right.
You don't like what we say because you're conflicted about what we're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
You know. Okay, so Romans 12:2 says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect.
Right.
Right. So, hey, there's how you prove it.
Right. Which is really interesting. So put that into, so if the word he's using is talking about fear all worship language of what religion is, let's put that back into the church. Let's be a little critical of the church here for a second.
Let's
and
do that.
just to say, all right, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed. That's what is perfect and true. How much of the world has seeped in to churches in their worship? And I don't mean that by like, oh, guitar and drums, because we know the drums are from the
Drums
Lord.
are holy.
Okay,
Yeah.
we already know that. Guitar might be debatable, but drums for sure. Little Drummer Boy, I mean, obviously there are many instances where, you know, did they have drums when they paraded around the walls of Jericho, or was it just trumpets?
Just the trumpets, I think.
Just a ska band? Okay.
Yeah, just
ska brings the walls down. That's another
on the downbeat. Yeah.
the downbeat. Now I lost. Now I got on the sidetrack with the ska. But I do think how much of the doctrine has infiltrated our doctrine, the world's doctrine,
That's a good
for the
question.
sake of inclusivity, for the sake of relevancy.
Right.
You know, we're not going back and doing what, if we really want to worship the way James is calling us to worship, if we want true religion, as he's talking about here, we're not going to let the world stain us.
Yeah.
How much of our belief systems have been stained by the world? And I think that that's how you can actually go to a church and say, are they truly worshiping God? Are they worshiping themselves?
Right.
First off, are they listening? Are they slow to anger? Are they active? Are they serving? Are they doing ministry? But more importantly, what I'm hearing, is it aligning with God's word? Or is it tainted by the world? How many, I think that for us Christians, that's what we need to examine ourselves on. Yeah, we can do more work and we can be, but are we aligning with God? Because that's what worship is aligning with God.
Absolutely.
And that's what religion is. It's not traditions. It's not rules of rights and wrongs and yeses and nos. It's alignment with God.
It's alignment with God, which is going to lead to specific action.
Right.
And that's where, James is great because he talks all about, faith and works and,
Right.
How they go hand in hand.
And now you see why he's talking about it. Because he's saying, hey, I hear your faith, but I'm not seeing your works.
Right.
And I see your works, but you need that faith.
Right.
You need both of these things. Yeah.
Exactly. Like I know in the political movements, I saw some things where people were talking about be careful of conservatism that doesn't have Christianity.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
yeah, sure, yeah.
Because then it's still just a system. It's not inspired.
100%,
Right.
yeah.
And we should apply that to the way we approach every aspect.
Exactly right.
Right. So, for those of us who are in the church, we need to not be so quick to tell other people how
Sure.
they should live, how they should be.
Sure.
But that does not mean that we are to accept what they're doing
Right. Or change what we're doing.
or change what we're doing.
Right. 100%. Yeah.
And we should be doing our best to go out and provide for people, to fill their needs, their real needs.
Real needs. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, their true needs.
Yes.
And take care of people and do it face to face. Do it in person. Do it.
Right.
Well,
that's the thing about the church. If you think about it, our ministry is holistic.
Yeah.
We bring you food
Yeah.
when you're sick or whatever. We bring you spiritual health. We bring you mental health. I mean, everything that we bring. I know because I've worked in social services. It's like, oh, you're homeless? Okay, cool. Here's a program that gets you housing. But what it doesn't help you do is it doesn't teach you how to build a budget.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help you keep that home. Oh, and by the way, you've got some trauma in your life because you grew up in a really crazy situation or you've got an addiction issue that you just can't manage. Okay, that's cool, but you got a home now.
Yeah.
And then you lose that home because you lost it to addiction or you lost it to trauma or you lost it. Christians come in and say, I want to love you.
Yeah.
The end goal isn't home or not home. I mean, we want to give you a home. We want you, but so that's what we as Christians need. We need to love holistically,
Right.
through our actions and our words,
Right.
You know,
using the gifts that God gave us to
Right.
do that. You mentioned that. Like, I could give you a home
Right.
if I had the money to.
Right.
Or I could teach you how to keep a home.
right, 100%.
There are different ways to teach and to grow and to help people.
That's Jesus,
Right. And our motivation all comes back to that worldview
Yes.
of what did God want us to do?
Jesus could have done all those things. In
Yeah.
fact, Jesus says in the garden when Peter cuts off that the servant's ear, he's like, I could call a legion down. I can do whatever I want, is what Jesus is saying.
Yeah.
I could make it rain money if I need to. Like,
Right.
but that's not why I'm here.
Right. And
That's not the point of this.
That's not the point of this.
Right.
And that's the thing is I think for us, that's where we have to be unstained by the world.
Yes.
Is through that motivation piece and through that worldview piece are we doing that so that someone will look at us and say, you did a great
Yeah.
job?
Yeah. Are we looking for the plaque outside
Yeah.
that says in memory of or donated by?
Yeah.
Even if it's in the world,
The only person we need to hear say good job is God.
it's God. That's it. Right. That's the only thing we should want.
Yeah.
Right.
Well done, you good and faithful servant.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Keyword servant.
Yes. Servant.
Right. So these are the three things that James talks about
Right.
as being the keys to true religion.
To true religion. Right.
So if you're in the church and you want to say like, well, I hate religion, I'm about a relationship. with
Right, right.
Christ. Look, we're semantics
Yeah.
here and words, and like go to what James says,
Right.
and consider that religion.
Yeah, because religion isn't that. Religion isn't the traditions.
No.
It's not. There is system. There is system in religion, 100%, because there is a system to God. But that's also not even at the core of it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And then, of course, I think the most important thing you can do to be religious is to appreciate those drums.
obviously. I'm glad you said that. I was feeling like we need to give a practical application. So perfect.
I don't think you can get more practical than this type of
This is worship.
rhythm.
It's worship at its. It's worship at its core, and it's jam band.
It's a jam band worship. No words, no profound statements, just profound instrumentals.
Slow to speak, baby.